right, Krystopher, welcome. It's awesome to have you here on the Gravity Podcast.
Thank you for having me.
Yeah, sure. It's a pleasure. And I know your story is rich and one that I'm excited to hear. As you know, with our podcast, we've been kind of taking people all the way back to the beginning. So tell us a little bit about kind of your early life, your childhood, your family, all that fun stuff.
Yeah, taking it back. I am originally from Virginia. I come from, I would say, a mix of military and a very musical background. All four of my parents were in the Air Force, and yes, I did say four.
Hmm.
Uh, so, kind of going. It's very important that I mention both the military as well as the musical background because my grandparents is who I ended up spending a good amount of time around due to the fact that my parents, they were in the military. My grandfather was a musician, and he was also a videographer as well. He was in the National Guard and he worked for the post office. My grandmother, she had a background in social work, and they were very active in church. So she was always, doing services, as well as whether it's feeding the homeless, very active in church, um, even helping senior citizens. Just we were always giving and trying to help people. They didn't necessarily have everything financially, but they taught me how you can still provide and do for people by giving in other ways. So growing up, I knew I was always gonna, run some type of business or be some type of an entrepreneur. My grandmother would joke because even as a kid, they would have like a little home office, like an old Commander 60 Commando 64 computer, like one of the first computers. We had to use the floppy disk with it and do the run code. But I had my own office. It was called room service, and I would ask questions and get people's names down. And I was legitimately thinking I was running a full-fledged company. This was at the age of 5 years old. I remember oftentimes during church when my grandparents would help out, we would have something that was called a repast. They would, help serve the food or either make the food. One time I ended up serving and just helping, and I ended up getting like $40 in tips. I'm like 9 years old getting tips. I wasn't asking for tips, just I was providing, good, service, and, people pay for service. I think that was probably one of the first lessons in value that I had learned from that. That was one of those things where people were acknowledging my value and my worth, and also honoring that financially. Kind of fast forward, definitely was a church musician. My stepfather and my mother were very, very active in church. I played bass guitar, drums, organ, did all those things.
Mhm.
And my stepfather was in charge of the audiovisual department in church. So, handling the camera equipment as far as engineering and sound, which kind of leads to the work that I do today.
Mhm.
If I were to say what I do today is I help people go from name to brand through storytelling. And there's so many different mediums in which you can use for storytelling, whether that's, you're doing a marketing video, a podcast, like we're on,
Mhm.
that is a way to tell a story. And so all of those skills, even going back to learning, from my grandparents, that's incorporating the service aspect as well as, different skills from audio visual is how it's helping me become such a great content marketer today.
Mhm.
Um, so that's kind of a little bit of a brief story. Did not go to college. I did go to college for a semester, but all of the work I'm very self-taught. The power of the internet has definitely helped me. There's so many different resources. Even as middle school, high school, I read a lot. I still read often. I know that the power of reading can help you go a lot further. So you're looking at someone who made a business plan when I was 12 years old. I just went in the library, got a book, learned how to do a business plan, taught myself what a marketing plan was. I helped my father, who did IT services in the Air Force. So that's when I was introduced to the Internet of Things, if you will, as far as networking and wireless, which also kind of helps me today with marketing as well, and consumer electronics. And I say consumer electronics because that is the medium in which we now both communicate and we reach our audience. It's no longer through traditional mediums like television and radio. The phone or Instagram is how we market. So, in understanding how technology has changed and being able to interact and see those changes has also been able to help me become such a good storyteller and using
Yeah.
those mediums.
Okay, that's that. There's a lot there. Let's back up. So, tell me a little bit, kind of, in those kind of early childhood days. I hear kind of the service, the music, the things that's starting to emerge. Talk a little bit about like what was it like to be, a child in your kind of family unit, and kind of how did you start to like feel about those aspects? I mean, certainly you can look back on them in hindsight, you can see how they've benefited you today, but what was it like at the time to be you as a child? It just, really kind of take me into that experience.
Oh yeah, it was definitely. I knew I was a very different child. I was the oldest grandchild, great grandchild, and child, and so a lot of things I had to do more so as an adult, in teaching myself. Being heavily involved in church, I didn't have your traditional childhood where I was great at sports, but I wasn't, doing sports in school, and those after school activities. My time was built. I'm learning how to raise funds and fundraise, for a church event. I'm learning. I'm spending more time, learning how to build these things rather than what I see my other peers and things like that when I go to school. But I'm also not interested in school the same way. I didn't find traditional idea of school interesting. I would pay attention in class, but the most important classes to me, or the most interesting classes to me, were the business classes. I didn't really care about like the history and science because I felt like it wasn't necessary in that what they were trying to teach and where I was trying to go.
And you
One of
and
the
you really
big
knew that at that age, like you could understand that, like, where you wanted to go and what was fueling you and what wasn't.
Yes, absolutely. Like, I don't know too many. I'm getting to daycare at 6 years old, and the thing I want to play with, I'm either playing Monopoly or I'm playing with Legos. I'm playing with Monopoly because I'm like the idea of buying property and building hotels and houses. I'm playing with Legos because I like building houses. I was very much so interested in architecture. I knew very much so well on what I wanted to do. I used to tell my mother I was going to be a stockbroker and be involved in finances. In the morning, I'm looking at the weather, and then I'm also paying attention to the S&P and Nasdaq. At a
Mhm,
very early age, I'm watching these things. I'm very cognizant of it, and that's
mhm.
rare. Not a lot of people have that self awareness at such a young age. And luckily, I had people and mentors along the way that noticed and saw that, and tried to do the best that they could to nurture that.
And that yet at the same time, which is often also not true, you've got this kind of musical side. So you kind of sound like you've got both the kind of left brain, right brain. You're creative and in the music kind of scene, and also really focused on kind of the business finance side of things too. That's pretty unique, especially for a young person.
Yes, and I was I understood I liked to create, but I also knew why it was kind of shunned upon to create because how are you gonna feed your family? How are you gonna eat? Being a musician, it's a harder thing to break into. But I also knew that there was other things attached to being a musician, the business of being a musician. You have your agents, you have your managers, you have your record labels. But yes, I did have that balance of creation and also being logical, which is very rare. And I could just make stuff. Like I was good at photography, I was good at videography, web design. I could always do those things. Um, yeah, always been able to do it.
Mhm. And I don't know. I'm just kind of like imagining you at that age, kind of with these interests, right? You're in the church world and the music scene, and you're also really passionate about certain aspects of the business world. And I'm wondering, like, What was your social life like? Did you have kind of a normal social scene teen experience, high school experience, or were you kind of more on your own
No,
doing your own thing?
absolutely not.
Yeah.
I had a very small group of friends. I was considered as an outsider, a geek. Uh, I mean, like most individuals, especially that kind of tend to have these stories or background. Because I just, I thought differently, but I also knew that my idea of what fun was different from another person's idea of fun. Like my first legal job on paper, I was 14 years old, and I've been working since I was 14. Like I've worked at companies that don't even exist anymore. Circuit City,
Mhm.
Alto, like those companies, don't exist. But I was also I knew that I wanted to accumulate wealth, and the only way to do that was to work,
Mhm.
and to make that happen. But I also knew that I didn't want to go the traditional route of my parents, like to see my grandparents work for a job 30 and 40 years to retire to have to work again, or the idea of my parents being in the military for 20 years to turn around and get a government job and then have to work again. It just didn't seem right. I didn't want to take that same route.
Mhm. And that sense of being an individual, was that hard for you at the time? Was that something that you embraced? Kind of how did that land with you? What was the experience of that like?
I often embraced being an individual, and just add to it, because again, I only feel like this is 5% of my story. I originally, being, at birth, I identified as female. I'm transitioned. I identify as male now, and so even in knowing that, I knew at the age of 3 and 4, like I know what's supposed to happen, but it just doesn't seem right.
Mhm.
I knew then, like I there was always that male aspect that was a thing, and then even my family and family members can attest to that, as well. So being and knowing that at an early age and knowing who you are, um, I became very okay with it, and then I also noticed how other people didn't know who they were, and
Mhm.
they were just kind of going this way and going that way, and then I just also knew, just from reading books, like, and all the people that came before me, like those people that were often misunderstood in their youth, those end up being the leaders, and that you considered an outlier, but you end up being a leader and you have to lead the pack.
Yeah, Christopher, I want to just kind of go in a little deeper with you on that because I don't think it's something that a lot of people really know kind of the depths of, and I don't, and if you don't mind, I'd like you to share a little bit more that at age 3 and 4, you described it as like you knew what was supposed to be, but it wasn't, how you felt, or it wasn't true for you. That seems really young. Can you articulate like how that became clear to you, or what specifically was it that felt out of alignment, or I'm not sure how to describe it, but can you tell us a little bit more about that?
Yeah, I mean, when you start to well, I've also my as far as like how my body has been, I've always had like a more masculine body, if you will, broad shoulders, stuff like that. I have my
Hmm.
father's built and frame. And so then even interacting and socially interacting as a child, at early ages, if if you're female and guys are not liking you, and that you're always the friend and you're the homie, and that's those interactions, you kind of start to feel some type of way. You start to kind of
Hmm.
understand some things about yourself. And then even those things that traditionally, I guess you would say that a little girl would gravitate towards, hated it.
Hmm.
Just
Hmm.
it just didn't feel right. I didn't feel normal. I wasn't comfortable. And so I've always gravitated to what strongly pulled, or what I felt more comfortable with. Um, and my and even like my interests, like I just wasn't good at certain things. Like I couldn't even color in the lines, like traditionally, some people may not like this, girls are really good at coloring. I was never good at coloring, but the things that the guys were good, I was good at sports and stuff like that. That's just natively how it was. And one of the biggest things that I do want to say is that people are starting to understand more. There's a big difference between gender and sexuality. And that's, I think, something that people need to truly, honestly understand.
Hmm.
Those two different things. I
Yeah.
remember I just to kind of
Mhm.
figure out if I wanted to share the story. I was 3 years old, going back to when I was 3. My great grandmother walked past the bathroom and I was standing up using the bathroom.
Mhm.
And we locked eyes. And we didn't say anything. She never said anything. We didn't say anything, didn't address it until roughly about earlier this year. She's like, I do remember that time.
Mhm.
So, the more that it just, everything just makes sense.
Mhm. Yeah, I think it's interesting, and we can talk about the gender sexuality differences and really make sure that that is clear. I think what's interesting for me is that today, at least in kind of my little world, I know this isn't true in many other parts of the country and world. The idea of transitioning and identifying gender is very well known and to some degree embraced and accepted in a very different way than it was I don't know, 10, 20, even 5 years ago. I think there's been a lot of progress in that area. I know as I just watch my own children who grow up in a environment where at the school there is trans bathrooms, there are a lot of kids that are identifying this way, and it's like not an issue in our little bubble. I mean, I know this is still an issue, right? But it's
Yeah,
come a long way in
for
certain
sure, for sure.
parts. But then I'm just wondering, what it was like, these kind of little dots that maybe your grandparents and parents were kind of noticing, and kind of what then like the family experience or the broader community experience at school, kind of how did you even have the courage? It sounds like you had the courage to really follow that the way that you felt. I think it's a pretty phenomenal thing for a young person. Even something like standing up to go to the bathroom, that wasn't something that was really okay, so to speak.
Yes,
And
yes.
you did it anyway because that's how you felt. I'm just kind of curious to kind of hear like what was underneath that, and how did that really kind of manifest itself amongst your family and the community you were in.
So, coming from a very religious family background,
Yeah, there's that
already,
on top of it, right?
already, not necessarily doing traditionally or dressing traditionally how girls dress. There was already an issue with that. And it wasn't until I didn't start the transition process till I was 26 years old. And the very interesting thing about it is that if I had to go and do it all over again, I would say I would do it at the same age because I'm in a unique position where I can say that I understand what it's like to be a Black woman in this world as well as a Black man in this world. Specifically, all the things that I accomplished and built in the business world. Um, I was identifying as a Black woman. So I'm understanding, and I have a great deal of empathy in knowing that yes, many women are not given the same opportunities to capital and access, as well as African Americans. And so with me, I was more concerned about my purpose and what I felt like I was called to like here to do, like my purpose here on Earth. Um, and like my biggest thing, being that my family was from Richmond, Virginia, they definitely experienced a lot of poverty. And I saw what low income housing, what it looked like, and what it should be. And one of my biggest things is that I wanted to change low income housing and the whole idea of what affordable housing was. Is just that was just one of the biggest things because my family was deeply affected, with redlining, coming from a city like Richmond, Virginia. I remember at one point in time, my family owned property, and as gentrification does, especially even before, not just gentrification, the 2008 recession in the housing bubble, I did see quite a bit of my family members lose property, and they just didn't have the finances, they didn't have the resources. Most importantly, they didn't know how to get the information, didn't have access to the information to better themselves or to keep those properties. Um, so my whole thing was I'm not gonna let, although I was still dealing with these things internally, like, okay, I know that what's on the inside is not matching what's on the outside. I couldn't let that stop me. I knew I was going to get to that point where I can get to the point to transition, but my goal and my purpose was more important than that transition at the time. When I
Mhm.
started to get to a point where I was starting to get into my career and what I needed to do and what I was building, I said, okay, I'm going to take the time to do this and focus on myself to work on the personal side.
It's an interesting thing because I think um, my worldview is that these things all happen kind of at the right time, and it's really fascinating to hear you say that in hindsight that you can really see the benefit of your transition happening when it did, having the experience that you had really serving you. I mean, that is really the whole point of this podcast, is so that we can see what's happened in our lives and how it actually serves you. And I don't know if this is true for you, but it sounds like in my own experience, there's a tremendous amount of gratitude that really emerges for having the experience that you've had. There's silver linings all over the place. Being able to understand what it's like to be a Black woman in the business world, boy, that serves you really well doing what you're doing now.
I honestly didn't really understand the gravity of it probably until like last year, the end of
Mm,
last year. Because a friend of mine was just like, "Hey, like you're like an X-Men." Not a
mm,
lot of people can say that. Like you're like the ultimate like empathy person. And then also knowing that certain and seeing it firsthand how certain demographics don't have that same access. Uh, I know I can be in those rooms and knock down those doors and say, hey, look, now with that male privilege, if you will, like, hey, look, this is what needs to happen, what has to change.
mm.
And I think that's important that there are people that are doing that and that are speaking up.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I just see, and this has maybe been a kind of theme for me. I'm currently finishing a month-long gratitude practice as a part of a program my wife and I are involved with. And they have a kind of silver linings essay where you can kind of write all the things or a particular thing that was really hard for you in life, but what was the silver lining? What did it kind of lead you towards? And it sounds to me like hard, no doubt. I'm not taking anything away from the challenge of the experience, but a lot of silver linings. I mean, to be able to see not just what it's like to be a Black female entrepreneur, but also to see the housing, inequality, the redlining, and whatever else that you've kind of gotten to see along the way has opened up doors really for you to walk through, in droves really, as you now go on into your career and adult life.
I definitely have a sense of gratitude. Now, I'm not going to say that it's been easy. There's definitely been a lot of tears. I've been married. I've been divorced. And then dealing with that, it's almost like it's just a level of just understanding how deep the human experience is, and understanding that all these other things that we all experience. Bottom line, we have that commonality that we're human. We have emotions. We have feelings. Yes, also knowing and understanding being Black, and being a part of, African American community, but, serving as, I am that T, an LGBTQIA plus, and understanding, how certain opportunities, are not given to, again, another group of underrepresented individuals. And so again, it definitely, I won't say that everything has been a bed of roses. There's been some sleepless nights. There's been lots of tears. There's lots of crying. But to be able to share my story and to let people know, like, hey, look, I do understand, but there is hope on the other side. It was worth every part of it,
Mhm.
every single moment of it.
Yeah. Yeah. And what's it been like? And I know it's been hard. And I mean, I can't imagine really, but I see it on your face and I hear it in your voice. And despite the silver linings despite the lessons learned, the opportunities gained. I mean, I know there's a lot of pain there. I want to honor that fully. Um, tell me, kind of what's gotten you through it. Aside from your own kind of courage, what else has gotten you through it? Was it mentorship? Was it community? Was it family? Tell me kind of what else did you pull from? Because I think this is really where you can be, and I'm sure are, of great service to others. The service being a thing that, also really emerges in your life at an early age. You have the opportunity to kind of share your journey here now and in other ways for other people to know where they can turn, what they can do to kind of pull through that pain they might still be in right now.
Yeah, I think it's community. Community is such a big thing, and not limiting to what that community is going to look like. Uh, Columbus is one of the few places I've lived in my life where you have, regardless of what people may say, and I say that because I've heard different experience that people have different experiences living in Columbus. I've lived in big cities. I lived in Atlanta. I've lived in the Panhandle. I grew up in Virginia, and I've been all along the East Coast. It's one of the few places where you have all walks of life trying to make life better for all groups of people. And in that, you have so many different types of communities that can serve. Like, you have a creative community. You have your entrepreneurial community. These different communities that still care about underlying the human aspect. And then they kind of come together as this like beautiful ecosystem. To see how the creative community kind of bleeds over into the entrepreneurial community, or the tech community bleeds over into the entrepreneurial community, even comes to construction. Like I and I have no problem saying this. Everybody has their qualms about the Gravity Project, but what the Gravity Project, what it represents, and how important it is, I think we're missing it underlying. It's a new idea of what it is to live or to be a community, and bringing the idea of having everybody together, having these common spaces. It's very easy to kind of judge or to think it's not about the community when you haven't been a part of it. And then sometimes in making these changes, and it being in Franklinton, it helps to elevate the community and kind of, um, bring in more opportunities for that community. Uh, and that's not, I'm not just trying to plug, but again, I think that's important, because as we take a look at what's going on in the world, the ideas of traditional living spaces is not going to be the same. The idea of, going to the office, I mean, here we are, I'm recording, we're recording this podcast through Zoom. You're in your home office. I'm on my iPad outside. The traditional office is not going to be the same, but you may have to be able to have a place where you can go ahead and leave and still be in the domicile of your home to be able to do those things, or to work, or to meet or gather. It's important. So going back to the biggest thing is community. Community is what has gotten me through. And the community has led me to meeting other individuals. And I'm just great. I'm just grateful for community. That's the
Mhm.
big. Don't be afraid to connect with other people, not just people that don't talk to people that don't look like you, that come from a different place from you. Although you come from a different place, you can still find a commonality, and although you may not agree, you can still agree to disagree. I feel that people feel like they can't listen to another individual, and if they listen to another individual, it means that you agree. No, you're just taking the time to learn, because they can still teach you something, a different perspective, or how they may have gotten through a different situation. Although the situations may not be the same, you can still draw something from how they got through that situation.
Yeah. Yeah. I think the community piece is really critical, and that can show up in a number of ways. I mean, it can just be a community of peers, a support network, a 12-step program, if you're an addict, any kind of group that, can share and support each other can be a community. And Gravity, is intended to really be a community that is really a support network. It can really bring people together to collaborate, to have fun, to grow, to really any number of ways. And yeah, look, we're all work in progress. Our intentions are clear. We're doing what we can, and we're going to keep getting better and better. But really, the intention is exactly what you said, to bring a community that does kind of honor all people, that is open and loving and really hoping to uplift. It's
And I
really an important thing.
and I think something that's also lost, and I found just, I know that a lot of different organizations, we have, these ideals and principles that our organizations are built upon, and we want to hold strong and firm to those things. But, you have to be willing to have the conversations, and come to the table to have the conversation. um, and it's easy, if there's certain things that you may not necessarily agree with, say, hey, look, I would love to kind of give you some input about how I think this, you could do this or do this, but be willing to have those conversations, and if, other organizations or people come and say, hey, look, how can we do better? We want to do better. We got to allow that space, forgiveness, and we need to allow that space. And again, going back to empathy, I can't stress that enough. Empathy is so important.
Yeah. Yeah. Let me, before we kind of go on into what you're up to now and kind of how all of this has really led you to your work, I want to just kind of ask you one more question about the kind of decision. You said that, you really transitioned at age 26. What was it like to kind of make that step, to take that step to say, okay, I've known this since I was 3-4 years old. I've been kind of living in a way that wasn't in total alignment, and now I'm taking the step. Was it like, yeah, just had to do it? It was time. What was that step like for you? And kind of how did it go through that process?
Um, it was a lot of research, and it was a lot of me having to understand, okay, everybody is not going to be okay with this decision. And I didn't care because I knew that I was making this decision for me and about me, and I had to be okay and know, like, look, everybody's not going to be okay, and you still have to press forward, because I knew that, again, it can go either way. And then from a medical standpoint, making sure I had the correct resources. And I would say, being in Columbus is very, very friendly when it comes to helping, and providing those resources, for the LGBTQIA plus community. So I had those resources and I had that support, from various friends, as well as medical organizations. So it made me more comfortable to go ahead and say, hey, you know what? I have everything that I need here. I can go ahead and do this with the right support.
Hmm. Yeah, good for you. Well, you've done it, and it's inspiring. And I know it's been hard, but it is really, I say that sincerely. It's really inspiring to see somebody just living in alignment with who they really are. And I know that it's probably still hard, but that's a battle I think that we all face. These ideas of, everybody's not going to be happy is a thing that I think is pretty pervasive in our society. The pleasing, the whether it be from a gender standpoint, or whether it be just the societal norms, peer pressures, parental pressures. I mean, these are all things that, I've battled with, and I think we all do. Really living authentically into who we really are, and not caring as much about who's in agreement with it. I mean, certainly you care about your family, you care about your friends, you want people to like you, but when those things are at odds, it's tough. And you've really made a courageous choice. I really, I'm honored by it and inspired by it.
Thank you. Yes, I know it's very, it doesn't matter who you are. It doesn't matter, your gender, race, nationality, whatever the case may be. Being yourself in a world where it's not common, that's the most bravest thing that you can do. And we're in a world where there's so much fabrication and we're craving authenticity. And I think authenticity is extremely important.
Yeah, me too. All right. So, how are you now authentically living into all this great stuff you're up to? Talk to me about kind of what you're doing now, and I know it makes sense based on the story we just heard, but share with the audience a little bit about kind of what you're doing now.
So back in 2014, my business partner Elle and I, we started something called Billion or Bust. The purpose of Billion or Bust wasn't about the money. Anything that we did, we wanted to affect a billion people. And we wanted to serve as a media hub for underrepresented individuals. And so we started out kind of highlighting, African Americans and just different people that were in the entrepreneurial space, because what they were doing in the entrepreneurial world wasn't being highlighted at the time. It's like 2014. It's back when Gary Vee kind of first started doing his little rise. I'm not belittling it by saying little rise. Jab jab right hook was that was the jab jab right hook era.
Mm-hmm.
And so we continued to grow, and we had companies reach out to us because they liked the way that we came up with content, and they asked if we could do it for their company. So we ended up spinning off and creating an additional company called Billion or Bust Agency. So it was B.O.B. Agency. So then we had a creative agency. Elle and I, we love sports, all types of sports, basketball, soccer, you name it, we love sports. And majority of some of the biggest sports franchises, I would say 75% African American. But those companies that own the content and produce the content are not owned by African Americans. So we started 2 Cent Sports. So 2 Cent Sports is a Black sports media company, and we create content that is from the voice of from Black voices. We have 2 Cents FC right now, which is focusing on everything soccer. We have a series that we had called Unfiltered with Jay Richardson, where it highlighted a couple of different athletes during COVID, when COVID first started, and how they were pivoting. We covered a lot of Olympic athletes because, as we know, this was supposed to be an Olympic year. Just to talk to them about what they were doing and how they were handling and navigating the space, even from the aspect of sponsorship, because they're not getting paid. That's their bread and butter is going to the Olympics. But we do have other content that will be coming out, and that we're focusing on, and more shows. But that's primarily what I'm focusing on from a business perspective. And I still help various companies and brands create their content. I'm the first person you hire on to kind of help you build and show you what your in-house marketing would look like. And then once we get you to the point where you're scaling and you're growing, then you can go ahead and hire on a full staff from that point. But I just help you get from into brand.
Yeah. Well, it's such a kind of emerging industry still. I mean, you're right. I got to see Gary Vee back in 2009 was my first exposure to him at Summit Series, and kind of blew my mind at the time. And I feel like, still seeing, a Barstool really, emerge today as, what might have been dismissed as I don't know, bunch of guys just talking about sports gambling right now. Now it's like no, that's a media company. That's a giant. That's the future, and it still feels like this space is still pretty early. The idea of content. Let me ask you a question, maybe a little bit unrelated, but are you familiar with the documentary Social Dilemma?
Yes, it's on Netflix. I am familiar with it, but no, I have not watched it yet.
Okay. Yeah. So I just watched this documentary. It's amazing. Really, I highly recommend it to anybody who has not seen it yet. I found it to be tremendously insightful. Basically, the kind of gist is really how the kind of primary platform companies, Google, Facebook, Twitter, Snapchat, you name it, are really kind of controlling and manipulating humanity. That they, through kind of the suggestions and kind of click here, clickbait, even kind of demographically and geographically, how search feeds are kind of really producing a fact pattern that really is specific to what your demographics are and where you live. And it's creating a lot of problems, addiction for teenagers, no, adults. I mean, anybody really, including, a kind of a tremendous amount of frightening information around how it's impacting teenage girls, and really, kind of producing a lot of divisiveness because, people are really believing what they're reading, and it's all kind of in one lane, and that lane, can be very different for another person, and it's, creating a lot of problems. Anyway, my question really for you is, with this emerging media, how do you see it in a way that isn't beneficial for humanity?
Marketing, depending on how you look at it, manipulation. Even the idea of bait and switch. I guess I would say there's good marketing, and there's bad marketing. But the issue with these platforms is that to a certain extent, it is user fed. So the more we interact with it, the more it learns us, and people are not taking into consideration what AI is. They think it just knows us. No, you're telling it, you're teaching it, you're teaching it to learn you. I mean, Spotify has one of the best algorithms when it comes to making playlists. I mean, the best. Their daily mixes are bar none. And that comes from us, selecting music. And they're like, hey, you like this music at this BPM? So let me suggest these other songs to you at this BPM and based off of these things. Even when it comes to Amazon. I often tell people, because, I've done UX and UI design. I've built apps before. I tell people, why does Amazon need to have your microphone on if you're not actively using it?
Right.
You wonder why you're searching on Amazon and something pops up that you just said, because you've given it access, to your microphone, all these different things. And we don't really understand those terms and agreements. We just scroll past it and just hit agree.
Right.
So it's definitely a problem, but it's the bigger thing of how to solve it. That the thing with that is that unfortunately we're in a space with America is we prefer to be entertained rather than to be educated.
Yeah, I mean, I think that the big point that they make. I mean, there's a number of really big points, but one of them is that the advertisers are really the customer. That we're not the customer because we don't pay for it; it's free, right? So they're not interested in what. And us as much as they're interested in the advertiser, that in fact, we are actually the product, right? And so they're using us to sell to their advertisers. And that's the whole thing. In fact, they say, the only other industry that identifies their customer base as users is the drug industry.
It's very true. Even the idea and the terms that's a very good point, because it's even the idea of instant gratification. That's an immediate drug,
right?
And I think even with the instant gratification piece, that also makes it difficult at times for people to have a realistic expectation of how reality is. Things just don't happen immediately. Sometimes things take time, and people can be easily discouraged if, they're trying to do something and they don't see that it's happening as quickly. Notice I say quickly as it's happening to the other individual, because again, we're only seeing what a person is allowing us to see. And that could be photoshopped and things like that. And, some people tend to kind of get more fixated on the result and not knowing the process or the steps that it took to get to that result.
Yeah. And I guess the reason I bring it up is because I think that, there is some hope. And I think the hope really is that the right people with the right intentions, have to really continue to lean into this part of the world. I mean, it's not going away. These platforms aren't going to just decide to unplug because they're not good for humanity. It's got to be fixed, and it's got to be fixed by the right people. And I know you're in that space, and I know we have a mutual interest in the Pride Fund. And I think it's stuff like that, the kind of venture capital that's really focused on the right things. I'm also launching a fund that's kind of aimed at really holistically supporting entrepreneurs. And I think these are the ways that we've got to really try to make a difference, is by doing it with the right intentions in the right way.
And to go back to that piece that you said, as far as it being users, we need to stop using the term user and to get back to just being a human, just seeing people as humans, and not so much even and that's great to hear, definitely, about you starting going to creating another fund, because even with the VC space, it just became so much about numbers and ROI, not about, okay, what are we building, is what we're building going to help humanity or going to hurt humanity, but my pockets are going to be fat? Like, is it going to be worth it? And that's just, again, going back to putting empathy and thinking about the human being at the end, not the.
Yeah, I agree. It's it's the issue with these platforms really is that they have one way to make money in their current business model, and their model is that they have to produce results quarter after quarter, increase revenues and increase users every quarter, or else their value goes away or is diminished. And that model is not a good model. If that's how you're measuring your success, is by increase revenues and increase users, and that's it, then to me that's not a good model. I think you can do both. I think you can really focus on the human and the entrepreneur, the organization, and really the products being good for humanity. And I think if you do that, there'll be plenty of revenue and plenty of users, arguably, potentially even more. So anyway, that's my little theory on venture. And it's great to see you involved with the Pride Fund. I'm happy to be also an advisor there. And it's awesome to hear your story. I really appreciate you sharing. I think it's a beautiful story, a beautiful journey. And any kind of final thoughts, anything you want to make sure the listeners hear and know where to find you and all that fun stuff?
Empathy. Just remember empathy. If I can, that's the one thing that I appreciate. Anything that you do, two things. Remember your why in anything that you do. And always remember to lead with empathy.